Very good morning, I'm Axel Threlfall. This is Davos Today, brought to you by the World Economic Forum and Reuters, live from this year's annual meeting. The headlines: Asian stocks rise on hopes the US will create a bad bank, while the Fed holds rates steady. Jean-Claude Trichet tells us there is no risk of the Eurozone breaking up. And what happens when business and politics collide? We'll get the view from Davos. All of that coming up on the show today. We start with the latest markets and international news from our correspondents in Asia and Europe. We've got Tara Joseph in Hong Kong, Darcy Lampton in London. Tara, let's kick it off with you in the markets.
Good morning, Axel. Asia markets up on signs the U.S. is getting closer to passing President Obama's economic stimulus package. That despite a dismal batch of corporate earnings pouring out of Tokyo. The U.S. House passed an $825 billion stimulus plan overnight. It's Obama's first legislative achievement since taking office. Debate over the plan now shifts to the U.S. Senate. Well, Japan's Nikkei has just ended up more than 1% today. Major exporters such as Canon getting a boost. A softer yen helping big names, and investors also saying weak economic reports have already been factored into share prices. Well, despite the upbeat mood, economic news out of Japan still looks grim. Retail sales in the world's second largest economy fell 2.7% in the month of December. That's the biggest drop in 4 years. Hong Kong markets are back in business after a 3-day break to usher in the Chinese New Year. The Hang Seng Index started the Chinese Year of the Ox on a very bullish note. It's up about 5.5% at the midday break. Major banks such as HSBC are leading the rally on the back of big gains for U.S. lenders overnight. China banks such as ICBC also gaining in Hong Kong, but Shanghai markets still closed for the New Year holiday. And finally, New Zealand becoming the latest nation to slash rates in response to the global economic turmoil. New Zealand's central bank cut rates by 1.5% to a record low. An effort there to cope with an economy facing its worst recession on record. That's how it's looking in Asia. I'll be back in half an hour with the latest on Japan earnings. Axel, back to you in Davos.
All right, Tara, thanks for that. We'll see you later on in the show. Let's get out to Darcy Lampton in London with all the international news. Darcy.
Thanks, Axel. Our top story: Iran will not halt sensitive nuclear work, as demanded by US President Barack Obama. That's according to a close aide to President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. Ali Akbar Khavinvekir has told Reuters that Iran has no intention of stopping its nuclear activities. The new US administration has said Obama would break from his predecessor by pursuing direct talks with Tehran, but Washington has also warned Iran to expect more pressure if it did not meet the UN demands to halt uranium enrichment. Iran says its nuclear program is designed solely for its energy needs. The European Union may be prepared to accept a Palestinian unity government that involves Hamas. Speaking in Jerusalem, EU Foreign Policy Chief Javier Solana appeared to play down demands that Hamas renounce violence and recognise Israel. Instead, he emphasised the need for all parties to accept a two-state solution.
It has to be a team, a group of people that will continue trying to obtain what is the aspiration of so many people, which is two states, and two states that can live together, and at the same time that they can live together in the context of a very important initiative taken by the Arab League, which is the Arab Peace Initiative. Those who can work in that direction, of course, they have to be helped and supported.
Washington's new Middle East envoy is also on a mission to the region. George Mitchell is due to meet Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas later today, but US officials say he won't meet anyone from Hamas. The World Health Organization says cholera has killed more than 3,000 people in Zimbabwe and infected at least 57,000. Africa's worst outbreak of the disease for more than a decade has spread throughout the country. That's putting Zimbabwe's rival political parties under even more pressure to resolve their power struggle. Regional leaders decided at a summit on Tuesday that a unity government between President Robert Mugabe and opposition leader Morgan Tsvangirai should be formed next month. And finally, Uzbekistan is claiming to be home to the world's oldest woman. According to her birth certificate, Tuti Yusupova is 128 years old. Born on July the 1st, 1880, she got married in 1897. Yusupova now lives at home with her granddaughters in the small town of Tortkol. She says her health is fine, though she is apparently a little hard of hearing. That's all we have for you from London. Now back to you, Axel, in Davos.
All right, Darcy Lampton in London, many thanks for that. Now, as a BRIC country, Russia was one of the emerging markets most expected to blossom. But this year, the ruble has been devalued several times. The country is dropping into recession and credit is drying up. To take the temperature of the Russian financial scene, I'm joined by Andrei Kostin, Chief Executive of VTB, the country's second largest bank. Mr. Kostin, many thanks for joining us this morning.
Morning.
How confident are you that foreign investors will start coming back into the country soon, given the assurances that we've had that the ruble devaluations will be capped?
I think this year will be difficult for foreign investors and foreign investment. Russia expects further capital flight, not as big as last year, but still I think the situation is quite uncertain. But with a view for 2010, I think there's much better prospects.
Do you think the bulk of ruble devaluation is over? I think your opposite at Sberbank suggested that yesterday. What are your feelings?
Yeah, I think the majority of the devaluation has been done, and I think it will help a lot Russian economy, particularly exporters. So we definitely expect the improvement of the situation in the oil and other resources sector in Russia.
Can you give us your thoughts on where the ruble will be by the end of the year?
Well, it's very hard to guess, like many other things during this crisis. I think there's no evident reasons why the ruble should become stronger for the next 12 or maybe even 24 months. But in the long run, I think there's a prospect that the ruble might come back to the previous levels.
Now, I want to talk a little bit more about VTB. Your third quarter was tough, loan provisions quite high. Again, we've had numbers from your opposite at Sberbank talking about the provisions. Where do you see your provisions right now? Where are they right now, and where do you see them by the end of the year?
Well, basically, we found, I mean, the reason for crisis in the Russian banking sector is quite different than in the West. Our major problem could be the weakness of the real economy in Russia and the inability of the companies to return the debt. So, in general, the non-performing loans for VTB grew by 3.8%, 3 times since the beginning of the year. It's very difficult to forecast what it could be, but the worst scenario we envisage could be up to 8-10%, and
we're preparing.
Yeah, we are preparing for this, but we still believe that it might be better.
So similar to Sberbank. Okay, good. A little bit of talk about, if we could, about whether you have any plans to borrow money this year. What is the debt position like? What are your plans for debt this year? Will you be borrowing?
Well, it's difficult to say. As many other institutions, we rely more on the government support nowadays. This year, we should pay around $7 billion of external debt. We definitely will be looking, we will negotiate for possible refinancing.
Okay.
But if not, I think we'll have enough liquidity this year.
Can I try and pin you down a little bit on that refinancing? Anything specific you can tell us? Again, we've heard from some of the other banks. How much do you think the refinancing will be, and what form will that take, and when will it come?
Well, frankly speaking, I think for this year it would be very difficult for companies to find fundings abroad, with the exception maybe in case if there's a state-owned guarantee, which is a possibility for the big companies, or some oil companies which collateralize their oil proceeds and oil exports. So I think otherwise, I don't think that the market will be opened for a Russian company this year, and for many Western companies as well, you see.
Quick word on full year 08 profits. We haven't had that number yet. We've had Q3. A word, if we could, on full year 08. And also tell us what you think about 2009. What are the profit and the revenue forecasts for 2009?
Well, it's very difficult to say. I mean, by Russian accounting standards, we had a very handsome profit for this year, around 900 million. But by international standards, I think the results will be a bit different. We still believe that we will have profits rather than losses this year. But I think a break-even result is quite satisfactory for us for this year. for last year, sorry to say, because we're now talking about the results of 2008. For this year, it's very, very hard to predict. I think our retail network will provide some profit. For the corporate business, it's still a very big question.
A lot of talk about Norsk Nickel, a company to which you're a huge lender. A lot of talk as well about you getting a board seat. Can you confirm that will happen? Can you also tell us what the position of the company is in terms of shareholder support for the board seat? How does that sound right now?
Well, it's fair to say we nominated our candidate for the board, and we explained that because we have such a large exposure on Norilsk nickel, we suggested this, and we found the understanding of majority of many shareholders. There's not one majority shareholder in Norilsk nickel, so we should wait for the election process.
Could something like this set a precedent in Russia? Could something like this set a precedent in Russia?
I think it's it should be treated case by case. I think there's no rule in this game.
Mr. Kostin, many thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much.
Now, our focus remains on the world's central banks and the role they play in helping alleviate pressure on the financial system. Earlier, I spoke with ECB President Jean-Claude Trichet and asked him how confident he feels that the right lessons are being learned and whether discussion and debate in Davos will set us on the right track.
I think, first of all, that there are a lot of lessons to be drawn from the situation that we observe since 1 year and a half. And I really trust that we took the appropriate way to be systematic in our identification of the avenues that are necessary. The Financial Stability Forum has been important in this respect, the G20, and I think a lot of good work is being done. Davos is important in a way because you are comparing notes and exchanging views between the political leadership, between the real economy, the financial sphere. A number of colleagues from the central banks are there. I think it's very important, and I trust that, again, we must give the maximum energy to draw the appropriate lessons.
Who is not giving that maximum energy right now?
I think that there is always a tendency, of course, to be less aware of the acuteness of the situation. We cannot let market economies to be that fragile. We have a real stress test of the market economy at a global level, of the globalized market economies. Nobody is challenging the fact that market economies are the good rules to produce wealth, but everybody can see that the present system is too fragile and that we have to reintroduce elements of resilience. And we have to do that without, I would say, excessive consideration for any kind of vested interest. We have to do the job everywhere with all part and parcel of global finance and of the global economy.
Let's talk about the Eurozone in particular. We have seen a marked widening of government spreads in the Eurozone. How much of a risk do you feel that is to the stability of the Eurozone structure? The IMF's Strauss-Kahn has very recently said this is a problem going forward and could pose a risk.
No, I don't think that it poses any risk to the stability of the full body of the euro area. It is, of course, I would say something which is important because it tells what we have always said, that governments, when they devise their fiscal policy and all, I would say, the appropriate decisions that they have to take into account the Stability and Growth Pact, the room for maneuver that are in the pact, but only the room for maneuver that are in the pact, and that they have constraints. The most important constraint is not necessarily the spreads, but is the confidence channel. If you don't give your own people and your own economic agents and your own household confidence in the sustainability of your long-term fiscal policy, then you're losing confidence and it plays against what you're doing.
But, Monsieur Trichet, that confidence is lacking in a number of areas. I'll bring the spreads back in. At the same time, we are seeing those spreads widen. We're seeing the credit rating agencies looking very closely at some of these countries. I believe it was George Soros who said in a session yesterday that a solution might be for countries to pool their resources to help the debts of some of these nations. How likely a solution is that?
Again, the present system of the euro zone and of Europe as a whole has been that there would not be bailing out of any particular fiscal policy. So the responsibility relies upon responsible governments and responsible parliaments being responsible for their own policy. And the fact that they belong to the euro area in particular is, of course, of considerable help for all of them. But again, one has to behave as properly as possible in the interest of the economy as a whole.
Which countries need to do more in building confidence?
I would not quote any particular country. Our message is for all, has always been for all. And we always stuck to that message. I have to say that other institutions not necessarily have given the same message, but we stuck always to our own message.
Your views are clear on Eurozone banking supervision and where you want this to go. How likely is it the ECB will take up that mantle as the supervisory body, and how much pushback are you getting from some of the nations?
No, first of all, I have to say that we do not have a governing council position. The governing council position on such matters has always been, since the setting up of the ECB and of the euro, that a very close link was necessary between central bank and the surveillance authority. And that was our position since the very beginning. We were never in favor of a strict separation between the two institutions. But that being said, at the present moment, a number of suggestions are being made by the Parliament, by the private sector, and I know that they are envisaged, including, of course, by the de la Rosière Committee. We will see what they say. What is true is that today we have a provision in the Maastricht Treaty, which is provision 105.6, which says that if there is unanimity of the government, some responsibilities in this banking surveillance area could be given to the ECB. We will see what happens.
But it seems to me something like this needs to happen quickly. How quickly do you think it needs to happen?
I think that we have, in any case, to continue improving, of course, whatever happens, to continue improving the cooperation, the intimate cooperation between banking surveillance authority and central banks at the level of Europe as a whole, and particularly, of course, at the level of the euro area, where we have the single currency. So this is, in any case, work in progress, and we have to make a lot of progress in this respect. As regards our own position, again, we have 105.6, so there is a possibility, but at the same time, I have to say, I have no position of the Governing Council at the moment I'm speaking.
Nasdaq was voted Forbes Company of the Year in 2008, a year of sheer misery for most on the markets. Panic meant high volatility, which translated into high earnings for the exchange. But with more off-exchange deals being encouraged to bring down trading costs, what does the future hold? With me now is Bob Greifeld, Chief Executive of Nasdaq OMX. Bob, many thanks for coming in this morning.
My pleasure.
So bright and early. How's business in a non-IPO world?
Well, the business has been very strong. Certainly the great volatility in the market drove high levels of volume, and we were the beneficiary. And I think most importantly for the market is in the time of the crisis, the registered exchange, in particular Nasdaq OMX, functioned very well. Individual investors, institutional investors were able to know exactly what their positions were worth every tick, every second of every day.
Your earnings are up. Your stock is down.
Right.
How's 09 going to look, do you think?
Well, 09 I think will be strong. We're not here to give further-looking guidance, but clearly we're positioned in the different businesses we are involved with. In addition, we're still completing the merger and the benefits to our shareholders and to our customers from the Philadelphia Nord Pool OMX merger transactions.
But volumes, I imagine, are being hit pretty hard, right?
The volumes have been relatively strong this year. They're certainly down from the record peaks we saw last fall, but by any measure, they've been reasonably strong.
I want to talk a little bit about regulation. We'll come on to SEC, CFTC in a sec, but how concerned are you that the noises we're hearing on regulation, not just in the US, but globally, is going to hurt your business?
Well, I think it's a great opportunity for us. We launched a clearinghouse for interest rate swaps. You have to realize that as the registered exchange functioned well during the credit crisis, the over-the-counter derivatives market fundamentally froze up and were a strong contributor to the credit crisis. What you have when you don't have central counterparty clearing is you are subject to the weakest link in the chain, a la Bear Stearns or Lehman, having the ability to freeze the entire system.
But let's face it, regulation, the type of regulation that's being talked about, that's being bandied about, ultimately it's not going to be great for your business.
No, I disagree with that. You have to realize the world that we're in today is heavily regulated. So the comments are those parts of the market that are not regulated. The cash equity marketplace, the listed options marketplace is very heavily regulated. So the focus is going to be on the over-the-counter derivatives marketplace, systemic risk in the marketplace, rating agencies in the marketplace, possibly hedge funds. But when you look at the world that we live in today, we are very tightly and heavily regulated.
What is the latest on the SEC CFTC? I know you would like to see a merger of the two. Do you think it's going to happen anytime soon?
Well, it's hard to predict. I certainly predict that there will be a fundamental change in regulation. If that means that the SEC has a different mandate, or if there's mergers between the different regulatory organizations, we only can guess at right now. But I would say, for the first time since the 1930s, the legislators or regulators are thinking of the regulatory environment in a fundamental and basic way, and so we will see some dramatic change.
Overseas expansion, of course, there's Dubai, the OMX initially. What other plans? Asia in particular. I know you've got some strong contacts through OMX in Asia. Plans for further expansion?
Well, we certainly do. I mean, we see our market technology doing incredibly well in Asia. We signed up last year TOCOM in Tokyo to provide them with technology with other great opportunities in the area. We also recognize that the interest rate swap market, that over-the-counter market that we're focused on, is a truly global market and represents opportunities for us not just in the U.S. and Europe, but also in Asia.
The central counterparty clearing that you can offer through the Philadelphia exchange, in derivatives and in options, realistically, how big is that going to be for you this year?
I think this year it will be an incremental start. I don't think it's going to drive our numbers in a meaningful way. But it's interesting you see that we have so many clearing efforts going on, Philadelphia being just one.
You don't regret doing that deal?
Oh, no. That deal accreted to our shareholders in the first quarter we owned it, so quite remarkable.
Bob, many thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Bob Greifeld, Chief Executive of the Nasdaq. This is Davos Today. Now a look at what's coming up at the World Economic Forum meeting later on in the day. Emma Pierce has all the details.
Day 2, and can globalization be a political reality? The Middle East faces a wealth of problems: political instability, conflict and falling oil prices. Delegates from around the world turn their focus on how to bring growth and stability to the region. Pakistan faces no fewer problems, and tensions with neighbouring India and Afghanistan mean the stakes are high for the whole world. The Prime Minister discusses how global partners can help to forge a future. Meanwhile, European leaders tackle the challenges of a bloc unified by one currency, but without fiscal or political unity. The ECB and European Commission presidents lead talks on how to improve Europe's economic governance. And again, delegates will scrutinise what went wrong with the global economy. Among the topics, the ethics and morals behind the financial crisis, and how the world will cope with an American consumer who may now simply stop buying.
In these uncertain times, world leaders are looking to all sorts of sources for answers. One of the least likely here in Davos is William Shakespeare. Richard Olivier, son of Shakespearean actor Laurence Olivier, has brought the bard to the mountains. Masters of the universe may have believed brashness was best when it came to leadership, but Olivier is offering Elizabethan alternatives.
In these uncertain times, world leaders are looking to all sorts of sources for answers. One of the least likely here in Davos is William Shakespeare. Richard Olivier, son of Shakespearean actor Laurence Olivier, has brought the bard to the mountains. World leaders may have believed that brashness was best when it came to leadership, but Olivier is offering Elizabethan alternatives. Richard, why is William Shakespeare relevant to a 21st century crisis?
Well, last time I came was 5 years ago when they were in the middle of the whole kind of corporate scandal business. So I guess they kind of called on Shakespeare in times of crisis, because they called me again this year.
So what are the bard's top 3 leadership tips?
Know who you are, communicate passionately with your people, and don't surround yourself with yay-sayers and yes-men.
What is the one Shakespearean quote world leaders should take away with them as they try to find their way out of the financial crisis?
I think I'll probably go with Malcolm from Macbeth, who right at the end of the play, when he's just been crowned, says, "What should be newly planted with this time? By the grace of grace we will perform in measure, time and place.
Thank you very much, Richard. This is Kate Jackson in Davos for Reuters.
Our next guest has made his name as a deal maker. Blackstone has been a leading player in the private equity sector. It's also moved into M&A, advising on some of the biggest acquisitions of recent years. But in this environment, are there any more deals to be done? John Stadinsky is the head of corporate and M&A advisory at Blackstone and joins me now. John, great to see you this morning. Let's face it, advisory, M&A, it's not looking good this year.
I think you've got the wrong line there on your prompter. Actually, what we find right now in this environment is plain vanilla M&A is very much dead. Having said that, because of the complexities of the world, complexities of balance sheets, almost all transactions have an M&A element, a balance sheet restructuring element, looking for rare sources of capital element. So it is actually a place where there's a lot of advisory work needed to provide broader solutions.
So specifically then, geographically, sector-wise, where are the deals happening for you?
Well, the big sectors, obviously, in terms of restructuring, financial services, enormous amount of work done in energy and infrastructure. We've seen that already with a number of transactions announced in the fourth quarter last year and the number pending in energy and power and infrastructure, including nuclear. Nuclear is much more strategic to a number of the Western European nations. You saw the EDF move in North America, and I think that trend will continue. Infrastructure is going to be a big, big strategy for a number of the Europeans with respect to North America.
What about the banks? Last year, on this show, you told us, I believe it was this show, you expected to see more consolidation in financial services. Now, how worried are you by the spectre of nationalisation driving that consolidation? Because if that happens, that's not good for the likes of Blackstone.
Well, actually, we've been involved in a lot of the restructuring work in banks. We were involved with Northern Rock in the UK. We're involved with a number of the financial services companies, such as AIG, restructuring globally in North America. But Charles Darwin is born 200 years ago, and vis-a-vis survival of the fittest.
Right.
We're going to have to go through a phase here with the banks where we acknowledge good bank, bad bank, and then after that there may well be a wave of consolidation.
But is it a fair point that the way we're going now, the talk of nationalisation, that's going to put a cap on any type of the type of activity in this sector that you were doing before?
We talk about nationalisation. It's in no one's interest to have governments own and control banks in the long term. This is a short-term solution in order to develop and maintain stability. There's no question these banks will go through a period of nationalisation. They'll go through a period of good bank, bad bank, but they'll ultimately go through a period where the equity will be recirculated and sold to international investors when people are more confident. That may not be till 2010, 2011, but there will be a recirculation of that capital.
John, last year again, in the wake of the Fed cuts, you said to us that the world is crying out for proactive leadership. How much proactive leadership do you think we've seen over the past year, and how desperately do you think we need it now?
I think the Fed in the United States, under Mr. Geithner, has shown a lot of leadership. I mean, I think a lot of the proactive things he did with respect to a number of the restructuring situations, it was a combination of having to think, sort of drive the bus, change the wheel, and put petroleum in the gas tank at the same time. And he really played a good, strong role in terms of that kind of leadership. I think with the Obama administration, there's a lot of signs there that there's going to be some very strong leadership, and I think that's why the world right now is very excited.
John, always good to see you. Many thanks for coming in this morning. John Stadinsky from Blackstone. Right, let's take a look at the weather coming up in Davos this morning and, of course, the ski conditions. Daniel Aman, the Managing Director of the Swiss Snow Sports School, joins us now. Morning to you, Daniel. How's it looking out there? The sky looks pretty clear.
Good morning. It really does look really clear. We have great hours. We have sun in the morning. We have maybe a few clouds in the evening, but temperature is increasing up to 2 degrees. Just a great skiing day.
And where do we go skiing today? What are the good runs? Not that we're going to be going skiing today, but where the punters out there go skiing?
I would advise actually going to Parsen. There's, besides a spectacular view, there's a lot of gentle slopes, and you also have the chance to do one of the longest runs in Switzerland, all the way from Weißflugipfel down to Küblis.
Daniel, thanks a lot. We'll speak to you a little bit later on. Daniel Aman. The time is 7:30. You are watching Davos Today. I'm Axel Threlf. We're going to start this half hour with the latest markets and international news from our correspondents in Asia and Europe. Let's get out to Tara Joseph, who joins us now from Hong Kong, with all the latest market action over there. Tara, what can you tell us?
Well, hello, Axel. Asia markets boosted on signs the U.S. is getting closer to passing President Obama's economic stimulus package. That despite a dismal batch of corporate earnings pouring out of Tokyo. The U.S. House passed an $825 billion stimulus plan overnight. It's Obama's first legislative achievement since taking office. Debate over the plan now shifts to the U.S. Senate. Well, Japan's Nikkei closed 1.8% higher, with banks taking the lead, and exporters up ahead of a slew of earnings reports just out of Tokyo after the market closed. Big name Sony reported a Q3 operating loss as demand for its products wilt. The electronics giant now on course to post its first annual loss in 14 years. Sony shares, however, still up almost 4% on the day, with investors saying the results were factored in. Toshiba also coming out with a third quarter loss, while Nippon Steel slashed its profit outlook for the year by a bigger than expected 36%. Well, economic news out of Japan also looking grim. Retail sales in the world's second largest economy fell 2.7% in the month of December. That's the biggest drop in 4 years. Hong Kong markets are back in business after a 3-day break to usher in the Chinese New Year. The Hang Seng Index started the Chinese Year of the Ox on a very bullish note. It's up about 5.5% at the end of the midday break. Major banks such as HSBC are leading the rally on the back of big gains for U.S. lenders overnight. China banks such as ICBC also up sharply in Hong Kong, but Shanghai stocks still shut for the New Year holiday. And finally, New Zealand becoming the latest nation to slash rates in response to the global economic turmoil. New Zealand's central bank cut rates by 1.5% to a record low, an effort to cope with an economy facing its worst recession on record. That's how it's looking in Asia. Back to you in Davos, Axel.
All right, very good, Tara. Thanks for that. Let's get to London. Darcy Lambton standing by with all the international news. Darcy.
Thanks, Axel. Our top story. Iran will not halt sensitive nuclear work as demanded by US President Barack Obama. That's according to a close aide to President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. Ali Akbar Javan Fekir has told Reuters that Iran has no intention of stopping its nuclear activities. The new US administration has said Obama would break from his predecessor by pursuing direct talks with Tehran. But Washington has also warned Iran to expect more pressure if it did not meet UN demands to halt uranium enrichment. Iran says its nuclear program is designed solely for its energy needs. The European Union may be prepared to accept a Palestinian unity government that involves Hamas. Speaking in Jerusalem, EU Foreign Policy Chief Javier Solana appeared to play down demands that Hamas renounce violence and recognise Israel. Instead, he's emphasised the need for all parties to accept a two-state solution.
It has to be a team, a group of people that will continue trying to obtain what is the aspiration of so many people, which is two states, and two states that can live together, and at the same time that they can live together in the context of a very important initiative taken by the Arab League, which is the Arab Peace Initiative. Those who can work in that direction, of course, they have to be helped and supported.
Washington's new Middle East envoy is also on a mission to the region. George Mitchell is scheduled for talks with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, but US officials say he won't meet anyone from Hamas. The World Health Organization says cholera has killed more than 3,000 people in Zimbabwe and infected at least 57,000. Africa's worst outbreak of the disease for more than a decade has spread throughout the country. That's putting Zimbabwe's rival political parties under even more pressure to resolve their power struggle. Regional leaders decided at a summit on Tuesday that a unity government between President Robert Mugabe and opposition leader Morgan Tsvangirai should be formed next month. And finally, Uzbekistan is claiming to be home to the world's oldest woman. According to official documents, Tuti Yusupova is 128 years old. Born on July the 1st, 1880, she got married in 1897. Yusupova now lives at home with her granddaughters in the small town of Tortkol. She says her health is fine, although she is apparently a little hard of hearing. Well, that's all from London. Now back to you, Axel.
All right, Darcy Lambton, many thanks for that. Now, the US has found itself in the dock here at Davos. Russian Premier Putin took a swipe saying growth had been based on greed and printing money. Wen Jiabao of China laid into low saving and high consumption. For good measure, ECB head Jean-Claude Trichet told this programme that all that had created a fragile economic system. Are they right? Standard Chartered chief economist Jared Lyons joins me now. Jared, many thanks for coming in this morning.
Go on.
Let's talk first about that swipe, the Putin-Wen Jiabao swipe at the US. Do you think it was fair?
Yeah, it was fair. Whether it was the right thing to do is another issue. People here are looking for solutions, not for blame. But in terms of their comments, they were right. The US has actually contributed in no small way to the crisis. The US economy looks in terrible shape. I tend to call it the 3 Gs. Glass-Steagall, Greenspan and greed contributed to the crisis. But the real issue that most people are trying to address, and indeed both leaders touched on, particularly Wen Jiabao, was the outlook from here. So when one looks ahead, the immediate economic outlook, both in the States and one has to say globally, is grim.
We'll talk about China's outlook in just a sec, but IMF global growth 0.5%.
Yeah.
Were you surprised by that?
No, they're catching up with reality. They were very optimistic, 2.25% last October, when it was clear the world economy was already slowing significantly. 0.5%, I think it's good in the sense that they are coming out with such a cautious forecast. Here at Standard Chartered, we tended to read the thing quite well, and we tend to think that the world economy will contract this year. But I think it's more important than that one needs to look for where the recovery will be. So 2009 is likely to be a year of global recession. 2010 is more likely to be a year of stagnation in the West, but recovery, this time probably led by Asia. And Wen Jiabao's comments in terms of the boost in China is quite significant.
Well, let's talk about those, and I want to talk about Japan as well. Had some comments out this morning on quantitative easing. The Chinese Premier said that he thought the recovery had started, or at least shoots of the recovery were seen in November.
Yeah, well, he was actually pretty cautious. Then he did actually say there were 1 or 2 snippets that were positive, but it was in the context of where he was in no way sort of trying to be too upbeat about the immediate economic outlook. China has reserve requirements. I don't want to go into all the details, but central bankers in the West probably are looking enviously at both India and China, because those high reserve requirements have been eased, which has allowed bank lending to start picking up. And that was one thing that Wen Jiabao was referring to in China. But as he was saying in his speech, and I would agree with, that the next few months will be very, very difficult indeed. Everything really does depend on the fiscal boost that China's unveiling. We're in a financial crisis, not just in China but other countries, and the outcome of every financial crisis depends on the fundamentals, the policy response and confidence. And confidence is very key. It's been shot to pieces in the West and it's very fragile even in the East.
What will the, while we're on China, the talk of the currency spat, US-China, what's that going to do to, well, one, what could it do to the exchange rate and what will it do to relations?
Well, the currency wasn't really an issue in his speech yesterday. Obviously, Geithner mentioned the currency last Friday. I think it's been expected for some time that President Obama would cite China as a currency manipulator this April. The fact it came out in such a way so soon, I think, has surprised people. I think it highlights the need for not only a boost to the world economy now in terms of all the policies being unveiled, but what the Americans are very much touching on is the need for a more balanced future global economy, and that does at some time require a stronger Chinese currency.
Let's finish up with the US, but bring Japan into that.
Yeah.
Fed held steady, of course. They talked a little bit more about buying treasuries.
Yeah.
In fact, I believe one member said, let's do that now. Bank of Japan Deputy Governor said this morning that quantitative easing greatly helped Japan.
Absolutely.
So the US should take heed and get going with that, should they?
Actually, you can't really criticise the US Fed. They have done a fantastic job. And here in Davos, people are so downbeat. A year ago, they were too upbeat. Now they're so pessimistic. We've had two big boosts for the world economy. One has been the collapse in oil prices, which is effectively a tax cut for the world economy. The other has been the huge policy stimulus in the West. And one shouldn't criticise the Americans or the Brits who've actually unveiled big stimulus. So the policy easing is very significant.
When will quantitative easing start in the US?
Very soon. But do remember, Japan only really unveiled quantitative easing from 2001 through to 2006. The Americans are doing it really much quicker, as indeed are likely to be other countries. So it is a big positive. If it's unveiled, it's going to help. And I think the policy stimulus to date has been a big boost, but it's not going to prevent a global recession this year.
All right. Jared Lyons from Standard Chartered, many thanks for coming in this morning.
Pleasure.
George Soros has arrived at this year's Davos meeting with many of his worst fears confirmed. He had long criticised market fundamentalism, the concept that markets will correct themselves rationally. But he's no less sanguine about a world where government takes control. So how does he feel that the new US administration is handling things? I put that to him.
Well, I'm certainly much more optimistic about the Obama administration than I was about the previous one. But I think, particularly on the international front, there isn't the recognition that something quite substantial has to be done to keep the global economy together.
You've made no secrets of your views regarding a solution specifically for the banks, the bad bank, to mop up toxic assets. It looks very much like this is the way that Obama has to go now. Once that is implemented, is not the problem that we can't really go back?
That's the problem, that once you commit to one course, it's very bad if you have to shift. Now, you see, I think you would now need a good bank, bad bank solution. But I would do it differently than what is proposed, because the proposal is to segregate the bad assets and put it in the bad bank. And I would keep the capital of the banks together with the bad assets in a bad bank, and then create a new bank with the good assets of the bank and recapitalize that, giving the shareholders the right to put in more money, and if the rights are not exercised, then the government could put in the additional money.
But are you saying, though, this is no longer an option once they go down the bad bank route and commit themselves to that bad bank?
It will be more difficult. I think if in the end, probably come around to it, because without it, the banks will not lend, because they know that there's a lot of deterioration still coming, and so they have to preserve the equity to the greatest possible extent, unless they are somehow obliged by government diktat to lend, in which case it's a messier solution of government interference than if the government actually put in the money and let the banks make the decisions.
Shouldn't the banks, the heads of the banks, be here in Davos? After all, are they not part of a solution?
Well, they could be here, but they probably got other things to do, and they've got probably plenty of headaches to deal with. And they probably don't want to be seen, jetting and.
How hopeful are you of fruitful discussion here in Davos? After all, we've talked of the key players in the US administration. They're not here, and the banks aren't here.
Mm-hmm. Well, look, problems are never solved at Davos. They may be discussed, but they're never solved here.
Let's talk a little bit about the bigger picture. You've often spoken about market fundamentalism, that we have too much faith in market fundamentalism. I guess this latest series of events has proven that to you.
Well, I think rather conclusively. The generally prevailing interpretation of how markets work, the so-called efficient market hypothesis, has been shown to not to be valid by the fact that the system actually literally broke down. So there's something, I mean, the salient fact is that this is a crisis that didn't come from some extraneous shock, as the theory would have you believe. This was generated by the system itself, and it's from the financial system that it has spread to the real economy. So there's something fundamentally wrong on the principles on which the financial system is currently operating.
Do you feel that asset prices are still too high at these levels?
It depends on which assets you look at. They're never priced right. I mean, according to my theory, which I think now ought to get a little bit more recognition than it has gotten so far. Markets always misprice assets. However, and this is the reflexivity idea, the mispriced assets, the mispricing of assets has ways of affecting the fundamentals that the markets are supposed to price. So you have a feedback mechanism that can move you in a self-reinforcing way. And that's what the markets are prone to create bubbles.
Last year, Tom Glocer completed a merger to create what he termed the media company of the 21st century. Thomson Reuters, which co-produces this program, is a more diversified company than it was a year ago, but with its strong exposure to financial markets, can it really escape unscathed as banks around the world cut their costs? Chief Executive Tom Glocer joins me in the studio now. Tom, great to see you this morning. I want to start on the back of the Soros interview. Soros said yesterday that he thinks half of the jobs in financial services need to go. That's going to be bad for Thomson Reuters business.
Well, number one, I'm not sure that it's going to be as great in terms of job loss. Number two, there'll certainly be, and there are already, significant departures out of financial services, but there will also need to be hirings in new areas because nobody believes intermediated finance will disappear. But clearly the nature, so the trading of very opaque assets with very wide spreads, the lack of price transparency, I think we're going to see those sort of over-the-counter markets evolve. But there'll be an increased need, and we're already seeing that in our enterprise group, for the sort of pricing data feeds and systemic infrastructure needed to accurately price assets, to assess risk and the like.
So you're optimistic for 09?
Well, look, I don't think anyone who's here can, in their right mind, be optimistic about 09, either from a global economy point of view or specific to the financial services. I'm very confident in the business model that Thomson Reuters has. I'm confident in the breadth of assets, so not only financial services, but legal, tax and accounting, science, healthcare, etc. And in our financial services unit, and don't forget this has been going on for about 18 months, even if you want to date back to, say, the crisis last fall, we've continued to see bright spots across the world. So, yeah, I'm feeling good about the business and pretty bad about the environment.
Last year when you spoke with us, you did highlight Asia and some of the other emerging markets as the best growth areas, and you talk about bright spots now. These are the areas you're talking about, is it?
Yeah, and it's not just in financial services. So, for instance, in our scientific business, which has the world's largest patent databases, we're seeing demand from places like China skyrocket. It used to be when you heard the word China and intellectual property, the next word people typically thought about was infringement. But guess what? As more and more of the research actually gets done and standards get set in places like China, they're more and more concerned about protecting that intellectual property. And we have the services for professionals, just like in our other businesses, to meet that demand.
Just in terms of, without giving specific numbers on the revenue and the growth target, the revenue and the growth and profits, The plus points that we've talked about, how well will that support growth at Thomson Reuters going forward?
Well, there's no question, and we've been saying all year, that growth has been tempering. It's coming down. But for the company as a whole, we've continued to talk about growth in 2009. I probably shouldn't go beyond that, given that our results are coming up in a month.
Are you still in a good position to make acquisitions?
I think these are the markets where you can make those acquisitions. So a recent study I was looking at suggested that companies who through the last 2 recessions kept investing and making acquisitions saw a 31% premium of their market cap to their book value in the subsequent years. And, it makes sense. Strong companies that can make it through this period can take advantage of the very mispricings in the market that George Soros was talking about.
So, again, just to reiterate, it makes sense for Thomson Reuters in this marketplace?
I think it makes sense for all companies. We have a consistent record of using acquisitions as one of the tools to acquire assets or people or capabilities, and we'll continue to do that.
Of course, Thomson and Reuters merged. How is the integration going? Word was that Reuters would have found it very, very tough to weather it on its own. How are things looking?
Well, I don't know. What Reuters would have done on its own was a much different beast even by the time we took it into the acquisition by Thomson. But together, the integration is going very well, both on the numbers, the cost savings, the hard machine aspects of integration, getting systems together, but very importantly for me, on some of the softer cultural and managerial bases as well.
Just to finish up with Tom, the dual listing is something that we've talked about for a while now. The shares, just to give a bit of background for the viewers, trading at wildly different prices. Is there any point in keeping that dual listing going?
Well, the London listing was left in place for a purpose, which was to meet the demands in the London market. Plenty of people said, we want to stay invested. We don't want yet another UK PLC to be acquired, and then we can no longer invest in it if our mandates say we have to stay FTSE invested. As long as that's the case, there's a rationale for maintaining the listing. There has certainly been a very wide swing out of the London market, and I think the North American investors, which tend to know some of the assets on the professional side and are even less spooked about the financial side, have stayed in, and there is quite a price disparity.
Just very, very quickly to finish up with, how different will Thomson Reuters look at the end of 2009 than it does right now?
Well, we'll be substantially through the hard parts of the integration. We'll have then delivered 2 years together as a team.
Will it be smaller in terms of headcount?
Well, it was always going to be smaller through the logic of the integration. 2 CFOs become 1 CFO, etc. But not on the scale that we're seeing, in the daily tally on the front page of the FT of how many jobs have disappeared.
Tom, many thanks for coming in this morning. Tom Gloser, the Chief Executive of Thomson Reuters. Now, Pakistan faces the world's most intractable problems every day. Instability at home, instability on its borders, and instability in its economy. Last year, it went through a political revolution after Benazir Bhutto was assassinated, and Army Chief Pervez Musharraf stood down as head of state. Now, a new government, headed by Prime Minister Yousaf Raza Gilani, has to find a fresh direction. Reuters' Steve Clark asked him what he's doing about Islamists and Al-Qaeda groups operating on Pakistan's border.
It's not a new issue. It's a very long. For the last so many years, it's a issue which we both are facing, and especially Pakistan is facing this terrorism and extremism. And we lost our great leader Benazir Bhutto because of extremism, and therefore we have a resolve to fight against terrorism and to fight these extremists and we have a cooperation, and earlier we didn't have a good relationship with Afghanistan. Whatever the new democratic government, with the new change in Pakistan, we are having excellent relations with Afghanistan, and we want to further improve our relations, and I think it is in the interest of Pakistan for a stable Afghanistan.
How much support do you think there is at home for measures to actually tackle extremism?
The new government in Pakistan, they are determined to fight against extremism and terrorism, and we had several meetings, and I was unanimously elected as the Prime Minister of Pakistan. And when we had took the Parliament into confidence, we had a unanimous resolution to resolve to fight against extremism and terrorism. But we have also evolved a strategy that is a three-pronged policy. That is 3 Ds. That is the dialogue and the development and the deterrence. And we are very successfully moving in that directions. And we hope with the cooperation, earlier there was a less cooperation on the military operation side. Now we have a lot of cooperation between the Pakistan's military and the NATO forces, and even the Afghanistan military, and there's more interaction between both of them, and intelligence cooperations too.
US President Obama is sending more troops into Afghanistan. Are you concerned that that could destabilize the situation there further?
It is in our interest for a stable Afghanistan, because we are looking after 3.5 million refugees, Afghan refugees in Pakistan.
Let's look at your relations with India and the jihadi groups operating there. What's your attitude to them?
In fact, after a new government, we really tried to improve our relations with India, and there were a lot of confidence-building measures were taken, and we were moving in the right directions, and we had more trade with India, and that was enhanced manifold. But with this incident, that's upset the situation, and I think we should move forward. And whatever the dossier and the information have been given to us, we are investigating, and we have referred the matter to the Ministry of Interior, and they are probing into the matter. And if there's anything substantive, we will certainly share with the world, and we have resolved to combat terrorism and extremism.
Do you accept then that relations with India are not improving and really now are on pause?
Yes, it's on pause. It's unfortunate, and we want to maintain good relations with our neighbors, and we are moving in the right directions, and we are probing into what has been passed on to us.
You have a very troubled border situation. Are you concerned that as a result the country could break up?
Certainly not. We are in a position strategically, in a position that we can fight on terrorism, and we are in fact we can fight this militancy with the support of the NATO forces and others, and that is I think Pakistan is in a position to help the world for peace, progress and prosperity.
Turning to the economy, the IMF granted Pakistan $7.5 billion worth of loans. How do you see the economy developing in 2009?
It's extremely difficult for a newly elected democratic government to be tough with the people. But we had been, we were already predicting the situation, and we were, from the day one, we were very tough, and we withdrew all our subsidies, and we set our monetary policies in the right directions, and we have we stopped borrowing money from the state bank, and that is one of the reasons why the IMF readily accepted our program. And even according to IMF, whatever the targets were given to us, we have achieved those targets.
And is peace the key to a prosperous economy then?
Certainly yes. We will be moving in the right direction, but we have to diversify our economy too, and we are diversifying, and we are giving a lot of importance to agriculture.
Right, it's now time for another look at the weather and any inside tips for those with time to get out onto the slopes. Daniel Amann, the Managing Director of the Swiss Snow Sports School, joins us again. Daniel, morning to you. It's getting brighter. It's still clear sky. What does it look like today, the weather outlook?
The weather outlook just looks great. We just had sunrise at 7:46, so in the morning we have very sunny weather, maybe in the afternoon a few clouds, but temperature will be increasing up to -3 at noon.
So in terms of skiing conditions up there, how do you feel about the conditions today and looking ahead for the weekend as well?
I mean, for today it's just like a wonderful condition because we received a lot of snow, but it also will remain the weather for tomorrow and also Saturday. So whoever's got the chance to be able to go outside, please do so.
And all the runs looking good?
All the runs look very good because we received a lot of snow this year. Temperature remained cold, so the conditions are just fantastic.
All right, Daniel, thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you a little bit later on. Daniel Amann with the weather and the ski report. The time right now is 8 o'clock. You're watching Davos Today. I'm Axel Threlfall. We start this half hour with the latest markets and international news from our correspondents in Asia and Europe. Tara Joseph standing by in Hong Kong, Darcy Lampton in London. Tara, let's get back to you and the Asian markets. How do they look?
Well, hello again, Axel. It's been a strong day here for Asia markets. Investors soothed by signs the U.S. is getting closer to passing President Obama's economic stimulus package. The U.S. House passed an $825 billion stimulus package overnight. It's Obama's first legislative achievement since taking office, and debate over the plan now shifts to the U.S. Senate. Let's go to the markets, where Japan's Nikkei closed 1.8% higher, with banks taking the lead. Investors said dismal earnings did little to quell investor hopes for the U.S. stimulus package. Sony shares up nearly 4% before it announced its latest earnings. The electronics giant reported a Q3 operating loss as demand for its consumer products sagged. The electronics giant now on course to post its first annual loss in 14 years. Toshiba also coming out with an expected third quarter loss, but shares today up nearly 3.5%. Here in Hong Kong, markets roaring back to business after a three-day break to usher in the Chinese New Year. The Hang Seng Index up about 5.5% in afternoon trade. Major banks such as HSBC are leading the rally on the back of big gains for U.S. lenders overnight. China banks such as ICBC are also up sharply in Hong Kong, but Shanghai stocks remain shut for the New Year holiday. Finally, New Zealand becoming the latest nation to slash rates in response to the global economic turmoil. New Zealand's central bank cut rates by 1.5% to a record low, an effort there to cope with an economy facing its worst recession on record. That's the latest from Asia, Axel. Back to you in
Tara,
Davos.
thanks very much indeed. Tara Joseph in Hong Kong. Over to Darcy Lampton in London with all the very latest international news. Darcy.
Thanks, Axel. Our top story, Iran will not halt sensitive nuclear work as demanded by US President Barack Obama. That's according to a close aide to President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. Ali Akbar Javan Fekir has told Reuters that Iran has no intention of stopping its nuclear activities. The new US administration has said Obama would break from his predecessor by pursuing direct talks with Tehran. But Washington has also warned Iran to expect more pressure if it did not meet the UN demands to halt uranium enrichment. Iran says its nuclear program is designed solely for its energy needs. The European Union may be prepared to accept a Palestinian unity government that involves Hamas. Speaking in Jerusalem, EU Foreign Policy Chief Javier Solana appeared to play down demands that Hamas renounce violence and recognise Israel. Instead, he's emphasised the need for all parties to accept a two-state solution.
It has to be a team, a group of people that will continue trying to obtain what is the aspiration of so many people, which is two states, and two states that can live together, and at the same time that they can live together in the context of a very important initiative taken by the Arab League, which is the Arab Peace Initiative. Those who can work in that direction, of course, they have to be helped and supported.
Washington's new Middle East envoy is also on a mission to the region. George Mitchell is scheduled for talks with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas later today, but US officials say he won't meet anyone from Hamas. The World Health Organization says cholera has killed more than 3,000 people in Zimbabwe and infected at least 57,000. Africa's worst outbreak of the disease for more than a decade has spread throughout the country. That's putting Zimbabwe's rival political parties under even more pressure to resolve their power struggle. Regional leaders decided at a summit on Tuesday that a unity government between President Robert Mugabe and opposition leader Morgan Tsvangirai should be formed next month. And finally, Uzbekistan is claiming to be home to the world's oldest woman. According to official documents, Tuti Yusupova is 128 years old. Born on July the 1st, 1880, she got married in 1897. Yusupova now lives at home with her granddaughters in the small town of Turkol. She says her health is fine, although apparently her hearing is a little tricky. That's all from London. Now back to you, Axel.
All right, Darcy, thanks very much indeed, Darcy Lambton in London. Now, China's growth may be slowing, but the country's appetite for mobile communication seems insatiable. China Mobile is already the biggest phone company in the world, with more subscribers than the population of the US. This year, China Mobile is investing nearly $9 billion on 3G infrastructure. But with the global downturn pinching China, can this phenomenal expansion continue? With me is Wang Jianzhu, Chief Executive of China Mobile, and he joins me in the studio. Chairman Wang, many thanks for coming in this morning. Let me start with that tone of measured optimism that we heard from your Premier in his opening remarks yesterday. Are you seeing any signs of a turnaround?
Although the international financial recession, China Mobile still got a very good growth last year. Last year we got 80 million new subscribers. Every month we got 7 million net addition to our subscriber base.
But strong growth. On the show last year, you said strong growth in China plus solid domestic consumption will be the two key growth drivers. We've pulled back on both. Surely that must hit your bottom line.
That's true. We had some negative impact because of the recession. For example, the decrease of exporting, and some of the works got back to rural areas. But we still have very positive factors. One of them is the government has some policy to stimulate the economy, including some mobile phone application in rural area.
Let me pick up on that, the stimulation of the economy. I know that the auto sector in Japan has received some tax breaks and some subsidies. Has there been any mention of your sector, the mobile telephone sector, the telecommunication sector in general, receiving similar subsidies?
Yes. For example, there is a policy in rural areas. If a farmer buys a mobile phone, it can get about 13% from the government as subsidies.
What is your revenue outlook for 2009? How much lower do you think it will be than 2008?
We will talk about that when we give our financial results in Hong Kong in March. And although the recession, I can tell you, even in this year, we still have growth. The first month of this year, we got several million new subscribers. And in Chinese New Year's Day, just one day, we got 9 billion SMS for season's greeting.
And how much will that contribute to your revenue? Numbers like the numbers you've just given us. How much will that contribute, and how much specifically will 3G contribute?
We just start our 3G rolling out, and the 3G application is focused on only the broadband wireless application. It needs a time to become mature, so we don't think the 3G will become a major engine of our revenue.
Are you seeing obstacles to the development and the promotion of this new 3G standard?
Yes, we have a plan. The 3G network will cover all cities of China by 2011, And because the 3G network is converged with existing 2G system, so our subscriber, they don't need to change their telephone numbers. They don't need to change their SIM cards. They can enjoy 3G application with dual mode handsets.
But what are the biggest obstacles, though, to the rollout of 3G in China, would you say?
I think that it is a new technology. We need a time to make it mature.
100 million 3G users by 2011, I believe, is the target that Beijing have set. Will you hit that goal by 2011, given the current climate?
I think we are confident of rolling out of the network to have a full coverage in China by 2011. In terms of the target of users, I think it depends on the market demands and it depends on the volume of the dual mode handsets.
Very quickly, any acquisitions planned? Or have you put acquisition strategies on the back burner?
We were very careful for international acquisition. Fortunately, we didn't buy telecom assets with very expensive price, and we're still very careful today. But you know, the telecom assets now become inexpensive. We are looking for the new opportunity for new acquisition.
It's a pleasure to meet you. Many thanks for coming in, Chairman Wang from China Mobile. More than 1,400 business leaders are here in Davos, and unsurprisingly, their mood is more than a little subdued. Consultants, PwC, have been asking why in a new survey released here this week. Reuters economics editor Nick Edwards met with Tony Poulter, PwC's global head of consulting, and asked him what it found.
I think the most striking finding has to be the general level of confidence. It's plummeted to an all-time low for this survey series. So only 21% of CEOs were very confident about growth in the next 12 months. And that compares to 50% a year ago, even as the credit crunch was beginning to bite.
There was a huge collapse in confidence between when you started the survey in September and when you finished it in November. The Lehman Brothers collapse happened there in that period. How much of the drop-off in confidence is there to blame on the Lehman Brothers situation?
I think it's difficult to say it's one factor. But clearly there was a slew of news in September, not just Lehman's, but also Merrill's and the banking crisis more generally. There's absolutely no doubt that that hit confidence particularly, and you can see that in the changes in the results in the course of September.
CEOs are plainly focused on firefighting. So what do you think this implies for the long-term success of their companies?
Well, they're not only focused on firefighting. I mean, obviously liquidity is really front of mind and everyone's focused on that, but people are also worrying about long-term durability and about sustainability of their business models. The best example, I think, is talent. You know, we all think a year ago talent was the key scarce resource. That may have changed. 72% of CEOs still see that as a critical long-term resource. And long-term, that's a lot more important than access to capital.
Now, the view of risk seemed quite well balanced 12 months ago. They seem quite skewed today. Is this imbalance healthy?
I think it's healthy that CEOs should focus most on the things that are most important for survival. But it's also healthy that over the long term they're focusing on things like talent management, durable business models, sustainability in terms of resources, which matter in the long term. So I don't think it's skewed. I think it's balanced.
How big a wave of crisis-driven M&A should we be expecting this year?
Well, I think we're already seeing a wave. I mean, whether you classify it as M&A or insolvency pre-packs or whatever, we're seeing a wave. M&A will come back. At the moment, I think the focus is certainly on distressed deals and also on joint ventures, which this survey shows are of increasing importance to companies that want to continue investing in growth, but do so in a less capital-intensive way.
As the financial crisis swept through Britain, the UK regulator, the Financial Services Authority, found itself very much in the spotlight. After years of presiding over a growing and prosperous financial market, it was suddenly accused of being a dog that didn't bark. Was the FSA really at fault, and what can it do now to repair the damage? Chairman Adair Turner joins me in the studio. Lord Turner, many thanks for coming in this morning. Given what's transpired since the last Davos meeting. Do you agree that regulators around the world, not just the FSA, should have been tougher?
Well, in the case of the FSA admitted in an internal audit report, which it itself published in April this year, that it made specific mistakes in the regulation of Northern Rock back in 2006, 2007. But I have to say, in retrospect, that is not the key failure that has occurred. It was not the problems in the supervision of an individual institution. I think the bigger problem was a failure of regulators, of central banks, of finance ministries, and indeed of academic economists across the world to understand the systemic risks which we had ended up creating in the entire system of securitized credit.
We'll come to that in a sec, but specifically for the UK, this light touch approach, the light touch regulation that Gordon Brown spoke so much about, did the financial crisis not discredit that approach?
Well, I think the idea that it was light touch was always somewhat overstated. I mean, there always were specific rules. I think the biggest problem was not the way that the FSA was implementing, but some of the fundamental approaches that we have at a global level, for instance, to the capital adequacy of the banks, the failure to have a counter-cyclical capital adequacy system, the failure to have enough capital against the trading books of banks and the taking of market risk. I think those were fundamental mistakes which were made across the world, and I don't think they were specific to the UK. After all, what's interesting about this crisis is it's actually had its impact pretty much everywhere, independent of the particular style of the particular regulatory authority. And I think that reflects the fact that the fundamental mistakes were systemic and failure to understand the whole risks in the whole system.
Now, back in October, I want to pick you up on some comments made back then. You talked about the banking sector being past the danger of systemic meltdown. Of course, since then we've had the second bailout in the UK. Are we safely past that danger now?
Well, I think the second bailout, as you call it in the UK, was not really a second bailout. It was a package of measures, above all designed to help the banks, to encourage the banks, make it capable for the banks to lend at the pace we want to the real economy. And I think that is how the challenge has shifted. Back in late September, early October, there was a real challenge of a meltdown of the inner plumbing of the money markets of the world. And that was really stopped in the UK, in the US, elsewhere, by the measures of mid-October. The challenge since then is that the problem has really spread to the real economy, and there is a danger of a cycle between banks which, although they're safe, are still not in a great position to lend to the real economy. And that's what the measures that the UK government, UK authorities took last week were aimed to achieving.
Are the banks of the UK fully capitalised now? Will we see sufficient capital for the UK banks, or will we have to move towards this nationalisation model?
We think, on the information that we have at the moment, that the UK banks have sufficient capital to absorb the predictions, the anticipations of losses which we run in stress tests that we do with them, and also to lend to the real economy. Now, it would be a foolish person, after what's happened in the last 18 months, who says, I can completely exclude something in the next 6 months, because you'd have got it wrong.
You're not putting yourself on the line.
You'd have got it wrong so many times in the last 18 months. But right at the moment, with the information available as we see it at the moment, we believe that the UK banks are adequately capitalised, not only to be safe, but to play their role in the lending to the real economy which we need.
Let's talk about the FSA's blueprint for the future of regulation. I believe that's due out in April. Of course, it seems the US is fast-tracking what they're doing as well. How much of the solution is a global solution? You spoke yesterday, I believe, about the use of a leverage ratio to complement Basel II. Again, international partners working together. Is it going to be an international solution?
Well, ideally, as much as possible of the next steps, the way forward on the regulatory system should be international. And there's a lot of work going on, for instance, within the Financial Stability Forum, within the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision, to try and develop agreed approaches to these issues like the future of capital adequacy regimes, of liquidity, whether there should be a leverage ratio, etc. I think that is the challenge. We've got to try and get as much global coordination as possible.
Is Switzerland the model? Is it working in Switzerland?
I don't think necessarily that Switzerland is the model. I think the fact that the Swiss authorities have introduced a leverage ratio, of course the Canadians have always had it, they've been used elsewhere, is a thing that's interested people. I think nobody sees a leverage ratio, gross leverage ratio, as the only tool. It's a very blunt tool. It doesn't distinguish between the different quality of assets. But I think there is now an open-mindedness across the world to the different instruments that we can use. And there are some arguments for combining the very specific approach of the Basel regime of weighted risk assets with as it were, the belt and braces of a crude gross leverage ratio.
It will be April, though, very quickly, won't it, when we
It'll
hear
be
from
late
the FSA?
March, early April. Okay. We will have a major review out from the FSA on what we propose on the future of regulation.
Don't want to let you go without talking, Lord Turner, about climate. Two hats on, of course. You've got the one that we've talked about, tackling the current crisis. The other, of course, just as serious, the environmental crisis. Has climate change been put on the back burner in this environment?
Well, I think what's clearly the case is that authorities across the world, governments, are particularly focused on the financial crisis because that is the short-term crisis. But behind that, I think a lot of good work is still going on climate policy. The UK, my Committee on Climate Change, produced in December a major report which recommended the targets for the UK over the next 12 and then the next 42 years out to 41 years now, out to 2050. And the UK government will be responding to that. So clearly, the biggest short-term political focus has been on the financial crisis. That's unavoidable, but I think it's important that we still have that focus on climate change.
Just to follow up, though, on your targets and the UK government responding, how sceptical are you of that response? We look at the targets, cutting carbon emissions by 80% over the next 40 years. We look at what the government's doing, allowing coal-fired stations to be built in the UK. Those targets aren't realistic, are they?
Well, the government has not yet allowed new coal-fired power stations in the UK, and we set out a principle which said that we should be only going ahead with new coal-fired power stations on the clear expectation that they will be retrofitted with carbon capture and storage in the early 2020s, by the early 2020s. And the government is still to work out how it responds to that principle.
Lord Turner, many thanks for coming in this morning.
Thank you.
Now, as the world reels from the financial crisis, the case for public ownership has grown overwhelmingly. With a long list of political participants at this year's annual meeting, government and economics are sharing the stage. Reuters' Jane Grieve has more.
At the World Economic Forum this year, some of the balance has definitely shifted back towards politics. Russian Prime Minister Vladimir Putin opened the forum, and China's Premier Wen Jiabao has been another keynote speaker here. Governments all over the world have pumped billions of dollars into flailing economies in a bid to lessen the effects of recession. But is it a move that's worked?
I think it's safe to say that the patient's been stabilized. It was certainly necessary intervention up to now, but we're still in intensive care, and it's going to take a lot more work to get the financial system healthy again.
Bank bailouts have hit news headlines in the past year as governments have stepped in to protect some of their lenders from possible collapse. In Europe alone, governments have provided financial assistance, in some cases taken stakes, in 15 banks since September. So as markets and shareholders hold the private sector accountable, how strong is the demand for government accountability?
Citizens will never accept that their taxes go just to save private companies without a long-term plan and the possibility to get benefits out of this. So I think that the accountability of actions is a key issue, and from this point of view we need perhaps new indicators to make companies and governments accountable for what they are going to do in the near future.
But it seems there is concern from some quarters. Executives are cautious and want to see how governments plan their exit strategies, or whether they plan to get back into business for the long haul.
If this is a temporarily part of the solution, then it could be okay. If they're going to fall in love with the ownership and say, this feels really good, and let us dig in, then it's a total different story. But so far, I think the market has been crying out for help. They got the help. We now need to make sure that the help is really working, and then we need an exit strategy.
Talking to delegates here at the World Economic Forum, it seems that this year there's far less of a corporate presence, for example banking, and a much larger political one. And while it's relatively easy for governments to extend their reach into the private sector, just how easy is it going to be for the private sector to claw back a bigger share of the economy?
When you have a systemic crisis, you need time to restore confidence. And we were just talking this morning about the impact that the crisis in financial markets is going to have for long-term retirement plans for a lot of people. So it will be very difficult for these people who will retire in the next few years to regain confidence in financial companies.
This week, though, the world's leaders are on neutral territory, and they'll take the opportunity to seek responses to the global economic crisis. And the remote mountain town of Davos, complete with its fresh alpine air, just might be the place to do it. This is Jane Grieve in Davos for Reuters.
Gulf economies have been slower to feel the pinch of the global crisis than many, but a steep fall in crude prices, contracting output and tightening liquidity are taking their toll. Latest reports suggest Kuwait's central bank is considering a multi-billion-dollar rescue plan for the country's economy and for the banking sector. With me is Ibrahim Dabdoub, Chief Executive of the National Bank of Kuwait. That is Kuwait's biggest bank by assets. He is also Chairman of the Arab Business Council. Mr. Dabdoub, many thanks for coming in this morning. Let's start bigger picture. Rate cuts, liquidity injections, it's not helping. What do we need to see the government do in Kuwait?
Well, a better fiscal stimulus, that's for sure. I mean, the economies of the Gulf depend a lot on government expenditure. I mean, it's the prime mover of the economy. So we need definitely a bigger budget, fiscal stimulus to help the economy work out again. Rate cuts, as you said, rate cuts and liquidity are there. It's helping, but not enough.
Is a package being discussed? I saw the news yesterday. MPs pressing the government for action. They're pressing for a package from the government. What types of specifics within this package do you want to see in terms of fiscal stimulus?
Again, it's fiscal stimulus. We need the government to spend more on postponed expenditures like projects and things like that. There's a lot to do in capital expenditures, in other words. This is, as I said, the prime mover of the economies. So this is the main thing we are asking for. We, as National Bank, we have also submitted a paper to say that basically maybe the government should interfere in the stock market.
21 billion, right? Is 21 billion US, I think, is what you said.
Up to 21 billion. Probably it's a high number, but it depends on the day-to-day workings of the stock market.
And just to put that into context, I believe your stock market was off about 40% last year.
That's right, in 08.
Is it going to help, though, $20 billion US to stem share slides, to buy value stocks? Is that going to help?
It's going to help. Even less than that, we think that it's going to help. The government has earmarked 1.5 billion dinars. That's around $5 billion. We're saying probably $5 billion is not enough. Maybe they should increase that. But they have started to buy in the market, to invest, actually. Buy is the wrong word, but to invest.
To invest. I want to talk specifically some of the companies now, including your own. Global Investment House, the largest investment bank in Kuwait, Islamic firm Investment Dar, both in trouble. Will we see any of the banks go under in Kuwait this year?
Well, I think those two companies have a liquidity problem. I don't think they are in trouble. We don't know if they are in trouble, but probably they have liquidity problems, and I think there are talks now about finding solutions for them. Another bank, no way. I think the government has made it very clear through the central bank that they will not allow at all any government to go under. Besides, I think the bank's situation, all the banks are in good shape. And
are in good shape?
Are in good shape. Most important, of course, there will be some provisions. I mean, most of the banks are taking more provisions.
And let's talk about the provisions that you took. Your numbers with those provisions were down about 75%. I believe without them they would have been up about 10%. KFH, their numbers were out yesterday. They also look pretty bad. You've also said you would like to try, or you will hit your 09 targets this year despite the losses that we've seen. How are you going to manage that?
Well, we have made a 10% growth this year, but we decided to take voluntary general provisions. And I mean voluntary general provisions. So because this is a crisis that has touched every country in the world, not just the United States or Europe, every country in the world, and we expect the worst in 09. So it's better to be safe than sorry.
Expansion plans. You've got a lot of expansion plans. Clearly, rising competition at home is forcing a number of the banks to do similar things. You've said you might have to put expansion, acquisition on hold for the time being. Your counterpart over at KFH made a point of saying yesterday they would not put acquisition plans on hold. Is that going to make you rethink the acquisitions and the expansions?
No, I think we make our own decisions, basically. But I think this is the year to consolidate, to look into your risk management practices, and to analyze your loan portfolios in a way so that hopefully when things pick up in 2010 or 2011, you will be ready for expansion. But yes, we're putting it on hold.
Ibrahim Daoud, many thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
Right, for a final look at the weather in Davos this morning, let's get out to Daniel Aman, the Managing Director of the Swiss Snow Sports School in Davos. Daniel, it's getting brighter, it's still blue sky, perfect ski conditions, right?
Perfect ski condition and a great sunny day. We will expect maybe a few clouds in the evening, but temperature will increase and you really have to go out today.
And where are the best runs today?
The best run, I would suggest to go up to Parsen. There you also have the chance to get the longest run. That's from Weißfluggipfel on 2,844 meters all the way down to Kuwait, so it's almost 12 k's long.
All right, Daniel, thanks very much indeed. Daniel Aman with the latest ski report. The time right now is 8:30. You're watching Davos Today. I'm Axel Frofel. We start this half hour with the latest markets and international news from our correspondents in Asia and Europe. Let's start with Tara Joseph in Hong Kong. We'll get to Darcy Lampton in London in a second. Tara, let's have one final look at the Asian markets.
Hi again, Axel. It's been a strong day for Asia stocks on hopes for a U.S. economic stimulus package. The U.S. House passed an $825 billion stimulus plan overnight. It's President Obama's first legislative achievement since taking office. And debate over the plan now shifts to the U.S. Senate. Japan's Nikkei closed 1.8% higher, with banks among the top performers today. Investors said dismal earnings reports did little to hurt enthusiasm for the U.S. stimulus plan. The Nikkei now up more than 5% so far this week. Sony shares up nearly 4% before it announced its latest earnings. The electronics giant reported a Q3 operating loss as demand for its consumer products sagged. Sony now on course to post its first annual loss in 14 years. Toshiba also coming out with an expected third quarter loss, but shares today up nearly 3.5%. Here in Hong Kong, markets roaring back to business after a 3-day break to usher in the Chinese New Year. The Hang Seng Index up just under 5% in afternoon trade. Hong Kong shares were flying higher until Europe started to come into the trading mix. European stocks futures showing traders in London, well, not quite as thrilled about a potential U.S. stimulus plan as Asia. Energy shares in Europe could come under some pressure, with crude prices falling below $42 a barrel. But, like Asia, banking shares likely to be the focus as the European day gets underway. Also in focus for European markets today, U.S. weekly jobless claims and December durable goods figures. That's the latest from Hong Kong, Axel. Back to you in Davos.
Tara, thanks so much. Darcy Lampton standing by with the international news out of London.
Thanks, Axel. Our top story, Iran will not halt sensitive nuclear work as demanded by US President Barack Obama. That's according to a close aide to President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. Ali Akbar Javan Fekir has told Reuters that Iran has no intention of stopping its nuclear activities. The new US administration has said Obama would break from his predecessor by pursuing direct talks with Tehran. But Washington has also warned Iran to expect more pressure if it did not meet the UN demands to halt uranium enrichment. Iran says its nuclear program is designed solely for its energy needs. The European Union may be prepared to accept a Palestinian unity government that involves Hamas. Speaking in Jerusalem, EU Foreign Policy Chief Javier Solana appeared to play down demands that Hamas renounce violence and recognise Israel. Instead, he's emphasised the need for all parties to accept a two-state solution.
It has to be a team, a group of people that will continue trying to obtain what is the aspiration of so many people, which is two states, and to a state that can live together, and at the same time that they can live together in the context of a very important initiative taken by the Arab League, which is the Arab Peace Initiative. Those who can work in that direction, of course, they have to be helped and supported.
Washington's new Middle East envoy is also on a mission to the region. George Mitchell is scheduled for talks with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas later today, but US officials say he won't meet anyone from Hamas. The World Health Organization says cholera has killed more than 3,000 people in Zimbabwe and infected at least 57,000. Africa's worst outbreak of the disease for more than a decade has spread throughout the country. That's putting Zimbabwe's rival political parties under even more pressure to resolve their power struggle. Regional leaders decided at a summit on Tuesday that a unity government between President Robert Mugabe and opposition leader Morgan Tsvangirai should be formed next month. And finally, Uzbekistan is claiming to be home to the world's oldest woman. According to official documents, Tuti Yusupova is 128 years old. Born on July the 1st, 1880, she got married in 1897. Yusupova now lives at home with her granddaughters in the small town of Tortkol. She says her health is fine, though she is apparently a little hard of hearing. Well, that's all from London. Now back to you, Axel.
All right, many thanks, Darcy Lampton in London. So we've heard from some of the top delegates here in Davos, but the media also play an important role as they dissect the sessions and the debates happening here this week. Let's get their view on the annual meeting. Steve Clark joins us now with our media panel. Steve.
Well, thanks very much, Axel. It's an absolutely beautiful morning here in Davos, as you can probably see behind me. The sun is rising on the mountains. The snow is glistening, but of course we have to head for the Congress Centre, not for the slopes, because that's what we're really here for. 250 journalists are here to cover the annual meeting, and I've got three of them with me right now. These are the guys who are doing the actual real work out here in Davos. On my left is John Gaffer from the Financial Times. I've got Kjeld Louis Pedersen from Morgana Wiesen Jyllands-Posten, Denmark's leading paper, and Uwe Heuser from Die Zeit in Germany. John Gaffer, I'm going to start with you. You wrote this week about the fall of Davos Man. Who is Davos Man and why has he fallen?
Well, I think a lot of the Davos men here are bankers. And I think the history of the World Economic Forum, which started in 1971, there's been 3 decades, really, of the increasing importance of the private sector, the idea that business people and financiers could do better than governments, in not only in doing their own jobs, but solving a lot of social problems. And I think that's come to a bit of a crunching halt this year, with the sense that actually they can't run their own businesses, certainly the bankers, so why should we trust them to run anything else?
Okay, Kjeld Louis Pedersen, do you agree with that? Is that something you're picking up Denmark's papers, that we're seeing a sea change here?
Absolutely. Mostly because people are seeming to dodging the issue of what really happened, what went wrong, and who is to blame. They probably don't like themselves to go into the blame game, but all the ordinary people, the man in the street, really wants to know. And that's why the issue of, for instance, John Thain and his office decoration became such a huge issue this week. And everyone has been trying to avoid the subject and say, should we look forward and see what will happen and what will come after this. But there need to be some sort of cleaning up, and that is being skipped, and that's why the Davos man is changing very rapidly.
Okay, Uwe Heuser, now you were just telling me before we came on that in your view, PM Putin, I should say, he definitely wants to know where the blame is to be laid, and he was talking about that last night in the session.
Yes, he did. He spent a lot of his time very directly put the blame on the United States, and not spent too much time on explaining in depth his policies at home, his macroeconomic policies. And I think that's the issue that I'm most concerned with here. Will each nation, each major nation, go into conflict mode, or is there going to be yet a sense of cooperation, especially between China and the US, which are the most important players right now in the world economy? And I think we are here in Davos, but also in the next couple of months, in a situation which is going to decide whether the world economy at large is going to tackle this problem cooperatively or in conflict. And in the latter case, we are in for a depression.
Okay, well, thanks for finding the gloom with your hat, by the way. But John Gaffer, I mean, do you see a turning point here? What's going to come out of Davos? Does anything ever come out of Davos?
Well, I think this year there is the possibility for something to come out of Davos because there's something really serious to discuss. Now, I agree. I'm not sure whether or not they're really getting down to discuss what really happened and to create some sort of cooperation for what could go forward. I think I also agree that there's been some talk, both from Russia, China, and also other emerging nations, that for example, the developed nations issuing treasury bonds, running up big deficits, so there's going to be competition for capital. So I think we can already see some tensions building up.
Carl, I mean, you cover climate amongst other things. That all gets pushed to the side. That's been a big Davos topic over the years. Is anyone actually talking about that much here this year?
To some extent, yes, because everybody knows that the UN Climate Summit is coming up in Copenhagen at December, and knows that they have to come up with some sort of a post-Kyoto. An agreement doesn't seem very likely, because who's going to fund it? All the money is going to finance or recapitalize banks and save the economy in general. So whatever may come out seems to be on the soft side.
Okay, so soft Davos, but so really we're looking, Uwe, for some clear direction out of Davos. Is that something you're writing about in design? Is that what your readers are looking for, do you think?
No, I think they have a more realistic position towards Davos. They know it's a big talking club, one discussion club, much more than giving real direction. I mean, the plan of Klaus Schwab to say within this week we're going to solve the world's problem and have a sort of a plan that we can then follow is not going to happen. But that's okay. I also think that it's not the end of Davos, man. Sorry to put it that way, but Davos and Klaus Schwab are very flexible. And if one Davos man dies, i.e. the banker, they find another one. And
that's true, but the bankers pay a lot of the bills.
They do, but then they may find industry companies and so on to substitute.
Maybe.
Just one question to all. I mean, we saw Putin and when Jibao here yesterday. Alex Jarrett from the U.S. administration comes in today. One might say a token member of the administration, in a sense. Has that put the U.S. in the dock somewhat and perhaps on the back foot here?
Well, I think the US has got an excuse in the sense that President Obama's just been elected. There was lots of issues, clearly, for his administration to deal with at home. But you're right, there aren't that many senior members of the administration here. They're pretty much absentee. I think people are giving them a pass. They're not resentful of it. But it does mean that you can't really discuss the issues with the people who were at the heart of a lot of the crisis.
Cal, is this the Davos that the Americans didn't show up at then?
Well, nobody really expected them to, because they had the clearing process of new ministers and so forth in Congress, so they really couldn't give a go for most of them. And probably that's why when Jibao and Mr. Putin yesterday took the stage and said, you brought about this mess, and they had the time and the limelight to put that message forward. And they did that very forcefully. I would even say to an extent where they reprimanded the Americans for what they have done, and without showing any sign of remorse, but just trying to fend for themselves instead of looking at a solution to the G20 summit coming up in London in April.
So, Uwe, so Russia and China have written the script here so far this week?
Yes, I mean, with giving the opening speeches, they have sort of set the tone. But I find some of what they say not very credible. They criticize the U.S. for bringing about this crisis, which is fine. Now President Obama is trying to do something major against this crisis, and now they say that they're drawing all the liquidity in the world to the U.S. Whatever Obama does, he's going to be criticized. So that doesn't seem quite fair. I was the only one, I think, hoping that Obama might fly in here for a surprise speech and then fly back home, which I think would have been a great thing for him and for the U.S.
I'm not sure what the American voter would think about that.
It's a long way to go.
He has 4 years. Yeah, he has 4 years.
Yeah.
But whoever I talked to, they said, you're crazy. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
And you were crazy. John Gafford, just a final line to you. You say Davos man has fallen, but what replaces him? Is it a government official with a sort of regulations manual?
I think what we're going to see is it will be a government official with a regulations manual, and there will be a rise of that sort of thing for 2 or 3 years, because that's what people are demanding, that's what people want. And then at the end of that, obviously the cycle is going to turn back at some point, and people are going to say, actually, we're sick of government again, and we want a bit more freedom and flexibility, and the cycle always turns.
John Gafford and all of you, thank you very much for joining us today. So there we are. That's the scene from the media panel here. Davos man has fallen, just as we all got the snowshoes and the smart suit sorted out. Axel, back to you.
All right, Steve, many thanks for that. It looks cold out there. Right, that is it from Davos today. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with some of the key delegates who are contributing to this year's meeting. We hope you'll join us at 7 a.m. here in Davos. See you then. Goodbye for now.